There are wounds that don't come from enemies. They come from the very person you've sacrificed your life to love. Today's story will make you cry, angry, and unable to take your eyes off the screen because it touches on something many of us never dare to say aloud. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications now because stories like this come every week, and you don't want to miss any episodes. Like if you believe a mother deserves respect, and comment the city or country you're watching from so I know how many hearts my story has touched around the world. I have replayed that Tuesday morning in my head so many times that I've lost count. I've gone over every detail. The way the morning light came through the glass doors of the bank, the faint smell of floor polish mixed with coffee from the cafe next door, the sound of my own footsteps on the marble floor, slow and careful the way they always were when my knees acted up. I've asked myself 100 times whether I should have seen it coming, whether I had been foolish to walk in there believing the world would treat me the same way it treated everyone else. I was 70 years old. I wore a light blue cardigan that I had washed so many times the color had faded to something closer to gray. My purse was the one my mother had left me. Thick brown leather, stitched by hand, the clasp a little stiff from years of use. I didn't carry it because I couldn't afford another one. I carried it because it was the last thing I had of her. And some things you hold on to not because they're valuable to anyone else, but because they hold the shape of someone you loved. I had taken the number 14 bus to get there. I sat in the back like I always did, watching the neighborhoods change out the window. The laundromats and small hardware stores giving way to glass buildings and valet parking, and the kind of restaurants that didn't put prices on their signs, because if you had to ask, you probably weren't meant to be there. Westbridge Financial Center sat on the corner of Alderman and Fifth. It was a beautiful building, the kind that made ordinary people straighten their backs just walking through the door. I had been a client there for over a decade, but I was not the kind of client they kept photographs of on the wall. I only needed $200. That was it. $200 for my blood pressure medication and the copay at the pharmacy. My usual doctor had changed my prescription last month, and the new medication cost more than the old one. I had the money. I simply needed to withdraw it. I didn't think it would be the worst morning of my life. I walked to the front desk and took a number. The lobby was busy, a Wednesday morning kind of busy, suits and briefcases and people talking into earpieces about meetings I couldn't imagine. I found a seat near the window and waited. Outside, a young woman in heels was laughing at something on her phone. A man in a gray suit was arguing quietly with someone at the window. I watched all of it the way I always watch things, quietly, without judgment, the way you learn to observe the world when you've spent most of your life in it, without anyone paying much attention to you. My number was called. I walked to the counter. The teller was a young man, maybe 25, with a neat tie and the practiced smile of someone who had been trained to look pleasant regardless of how his day was going. "Good morning," I said. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." "Of course." He was already typing. "Account number?" I gave it to him. I folded my hands on the counter and waited. And that was when I heard her voice. It came from the glass-walled office to my right. The branch manager's office. The door was slightly open. I could see the back of a woman in a tailored cream blazer, her dark hair pulled into a smooth chignon, speaking to a man in an expensive suit with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing you belong exactly where you are. I recognized that posture before I saw her face. I had watched it develop over 20 years, the careful straightening of the spine, the way she angled her shoulders. I had once believed it was simply my daughter growing into herself. I understood now that it was something else entirely. Victoria stepped out of the office. She was guiding her client toward the door with one hand lightly on his elbow, the way you do when you want someone to feel important. She was laughing at something he said, that bright, polished laugh she had practiced until it sounded effortless. Then she glanced toward the counter, and she saw me. The laugh didn't stop immediately. It faded, the way a radio signal does when you drive out of range. Her eyes met mine for 1 second, one full second where I thought, maybe she'll cross the lobby, maybe she'll say something, maybe she'll give me the smallest piece of what it felt like to be her mother. She looked away, not quickly, not with embarrassment, She simply redirected her gaze the way you redirect it from something that doesn't concern you, and she turned back to her client and kept talking as if the woman at the counter in the faded blue cardigan was no one she had ever seen before in her life. I stood there. I did not move. I did not cry. I pressed my hands flat against the counter because they had started to shake slightly, and I did not want the young teller to see. "Ma'am," he said gently, "the amount you'd like to withdraw." $200, I said. My voice was steady. I've always been good at keeping my voice steady when everything else inside me is not. He began to process the transaction. And then Victoria's voice carried across the lobby. Not because she had raised it deliberately, but because glass buildings carry sound in ways their architects never account for. And because, I think, some part of her had stopped being careful. "Gerald, I was thinking we could schedule the portfolio review for Thursday." A pause. Her client had said something. She laughed again. "Oh, I know. The lobby gets all kinds, especially mid-morning. You'd think people would do their banking online." I heard it. The teller heard it. His smile flickered. 3 people near me heard it. I saw one woman glance at me and then quickly look at the floor. I stayed at the counter. I breathed slowly. I told myself that perhaps I had misunderstood. That perhaps she hadn't meant it the way it landed. That perhaps I was being too sensitive, the way I had told myself 100 times before over the past 15 years, whenever something Victoria did or said left a mark on me that I couldn't explain away. Then she walked past. She was guiding her client toward the exit, and she had to pass behind the teller row to get there. And as she did, she slowed for just a moment and looked at the screen in front of the young man at my counter. The way a manager does when they're monitoring their staff, keeping tabs, making sure everything is being handled properly. She saw the withdrawal amount, $200. She made a sound. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was softer than that, quieter. The kind of sound you make when something confirms exactly what you expected. $200, she said. She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to no one in particular, which is somehow worse. This isn't a charity office. She glanced at her client with a small, conspiratorial smile. The smile of a woman who wanted someone to know that she was not associated with what was happening at that counter. Perhaps there's a more appropriate institution better suited to certain clients' needs. The lobby went quiet. Not all at once. The way sound dies in a room isn't like flipping a switch. It's like a tide going out. The conversations near the door taper first, then the ones by the center, and then you become aware that the only sounds left are the hum of the air conditioning and the soft mechanical click of keyboards. Everyone was looking at me. I was standing at a bank counter in a faded cardigan with an old leather purse and a request for $200, and the branch manager, my daughter, had just made sure that everyone in that lobby understood what she thought of me. I did not move. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't hit you immediately. It arrives slowly, like water rising rather than a wave crashing. I had felt it before. The first time Victoria didn't come home for Christmas because she had a better invitation. The first time she introduced me to her colleagues at a work event, and I watched her pause half a beat too long before saying, "This is Evelyn," without the word mother anywhere in the sentence. The first time I called her office, and her assistant told me she was unavailable, and I knew, in the way that mothers know things, that she was sitting 20 feet away and had simply chosen not to pick up. I had told myself that she was busy, that she was stressed, that the world she had built required things of her that I didn't fully understand. I had spent 15 years making excuses for a woman I pushed into the world with my own hands. Standing at that counter with the lobby silent and my daughter's back already turned, I stopped making excuses. Something shifted inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but something that had been holding a particular position for a very long time simply let go. The way a muscle does when you've been clenching it so long, you've forgotten what it felt like to relax. And the release is almost painful because you realize how long you were tensed. I looked at the teller. He was young and clearly mortified. His ears had gone red. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Ma'am, Don't apologize," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." I looked past him toward the door through which my daughter had just walked, still laughing, her client's elbow still in her hand. "Actually," I said, "I've changed my mind about the withdrawal." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" I'd like to speak with someone about a different transaction. I set my purse on the counter. My hands were not shaking anymore. I'd like to speak with whoever handles major account requests. He hesitated. Major account? That would be our regional operations manager, but she's... Please get her, I said. Something in my voice made him stop asking questions. He picked up the phone. Bochum, I will tell you something about the years between building a life and arriving at 70. Nobody warns you about the particular loneliness of being a mother who worked herself to the edge of what she could survive so that her child could have everything she didn't, and then watching that child look through her like glass. I grew up with nothing. My father, William Carter, was a man who understood things about money that I didn't learn until after he was gone. He had worked in oil distribution for 30 years, living modestly, saving quietly, investing carefully in ways that never drew attention because he believed, deeply, privately, that wealth announced too loudly becomes a target. He left me everything. I didn't discover the full extent of what he'd left until 3 years after his death, when his attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Aldridge, who wore the same brown cardigan every time I'd ever seen him, handed me an envelope across a conference table and told me to take my time. I took my time. What I found in that envelope rearranged my understanding of my entire life. My father had built something, quietly, over decades. Investments that had compounded in ways I hadn't known to watch for, property that had appreciated, accounts that had grown in the background while we lived in a small house and drove a used car and never took vacations that cost more than a tank of gas. I sat with what I had learned for a long time before I decided what to do with it. Victoria was already at the bank by then, already climbing, already beginning the slow process of becoming the person she would one day be. The polished one, the powerful one, the one who laughed a certain kind of laugh at work events and faded whenever I entered a room. I watched her. I thought, if she knows, I will never know. If she knows there is money, I will spend the rest of my life wondering whether she loves me or loves what I have. I had already watched her friendship circle shift entirely toward people with the right addresses and the right last names. I had already noticed that the way she treated people changed depending on what they could do for her. So I kept the secret. I deposited the inheritance into a separate account at Westbridge Financial, a large one, an account that bore my name and my father's legacy, an account I had never touched, never moved, never mentioned to anyone. I wanted to see. I wanted to know whether my daughter would love me without knowing what I had. I waited. For years, I waited. And what I watched broke something in me so slowly I didn't notice it happening until the morning I stood at a counter with $200 and my daughter's back turning away from me in front of everyone. The answer was no. Victoria would not love me without knowing what I had. She wouldn't even acknowledge me. She had spent years polishing herself into someone her mother embarrassed. And when given the choice between protecting me and protecting her image, she had chosen her image without a moment's hesitation. I had my answer. And now I was going to do something with it. But the regional operations manager's name was Helen Park. She was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the brisk, efficient manner of someone who had been in banking long enough to have seen most things. She came out of the back office within 4 minutes. When she saw me, her expression was professionally neutral. Mrs. Carter? She extended her hand. I understand you'd like to discuss a transaction. Why don't we step into a private room? That won't be necessary, I said. She paused. I'd like to make a withdrawal, I said. But not $200. Helen Park looked at me carefully. There was something in my face, I think, some quality of stillness that made her slow down. Of course, she said. What amount were you thinking? I looked past her at the lobby, at the teller who had helped me, at the small cluster of customers who were pretending not to watch, at the glass office where my daughter was now standing at her desk, visible through the window, typing something into her computer with the focused calm of a woman who believed the situation at the counter had been forgotten. $3.5 million, I said clearly. The words landed in the quiet lobby like a stone dropped into still water. Helen Park did not move for a full second. Then she said, very carefully, Could you repeat that, Mrs. Carter? $3,500,000, I said. I'd like to begin the process of withdrawing it today. The teller's keyboard stopped clicking. Someone behind me drew a breath. And in the glass office, I watched my daughter's head turn slowly toward the lobby floor. Helen Park had the kind of face that had been trained over 30 years not to show surprise. She had sat across from grieving widows liquidating everything, from young investors who had inherited more than they knew what to do with, from businessmen trying to move money quietly before a divorce was finalized. She had heard large numbers before. She had processed transactions that would make most people's hands shake. But the way she looked at me in that moment, that brief, involuntary stillness, her pen hovering half an inch above her notepad, told me that $3.5 million coming out of the mouth of a 70-year-old woman in a faded cardigan with a handmade leather purse was not something her training had entirely prepared her for. She recovered quickly. That was her job. "Mrs. Carter," she said, keeping her voice low and even, "why don't we at least step to the side? There's a consultation area, just—" "I'm fine right here," I said. I wasn't being difficult. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to make a scene for the sake of making one. I had spent 70 years trying not to make scenes. I had swallowed discomfort in restaurants, at family gatherings, at school events where I showed up in clothes that weren't quite right, and I had never once raised my voice in a way that called attention to myself. But I had also spent my entire life being managed, being moved to the side, being handled by people who assumed that the most comfortable place for someone like me was somewhere slightly out of view. I was done being moved to the side. "I understand," Helen said carefully. "Let me just verify a few things. Could I have your full name and account number?" I gave them to her. She typed. She waited. She read what came up on the screen, and I watched her read it a second time, and then she set her pen down on her notepad very deliberately, as if she needed both hands free for what came next. "Mrs. Carter," she said, and her voice had changed, not by much, but enough that I noticed. "I want to make sure we process this correctly. A withdrawal of this size requires some additional steps. It's not something we can process at the standard counter, and we'll need to—" "I understand," I said. "Take whatever time you need." She nodded. Then she looked at the young teller who had helped me originally. He was still standing at his station, his eyes moving between me and Helen with the expression of someone watching a play where he couldn't quite tell if the ending was going to be a tragedy or not. And she said quietly but clearly, "Please let Mr. Donovan know I need him." Mr. Donovan, I would learn, was the regional director. He worked out of an office on the second floor that I had never been to, had never known existed, had never had any reason to visit in all the years I had held an account at this bank. He came down in under 3 minutes. That, more than anything, told me something about the number I had said. His name was Robert Donovan. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of careful handshake that communicates authority without aggression. He wore a dark navy suit and a tie with small geometric patterns on it, and when he saw me, he did not look surprised. But I could tell he had been briefed on the way down, because his expression carried a specific quality of measured openness, the kind you practice when you've been told to expect something unusual. "Mrs. Carter." He shook my hand. His grip was firm and respectful. "I'm Robert Donovan, Regional Director. It's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you'd like to discuss a significant transaction today." "Yes," I said. "Of course. Would you please follow me? We have a private suite on the second floor where we can—" "I'd prefer to stay here," I said again. He paused, glanced at Helen Park. Something passed between them that I couldn't entirely read. Not frustration, more like recalibration. "Of course," he said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." He moved to the counter beside me, pulled up the account information on a secondary terminal, and began the verification process. Identity confirmation, account authentication, security questions that I answered one by one in a voice so calm it surprised even me. And the whole time I was aware of the lobby around us. I was aware of the conversations that had stopped, of the customers who were taking longer than necessary to fill out their deposit slips, of the tellers who were finding reasons to stay close to their stations rather than retreating to the back. I was aware of the woman near the door who had her phone angled slightly downward in a way that made me think she might be recording, though I couldn't be certain. And I was aware of the glass office to my right. Victoria had moved to the window. She wasn't standing directly in front of it. She was standing to one side, the way people do when they want to see without being seen. She was still holding a folder in her hand as if she had been in the middle of something when everything shifted, and she hadn't been able to put it down because putting it down would mean acknowledging that something had shifted. I did not look at her directly. I answered Mr. Donovan's questions. "Can I ask," he said, in the tone of someone who knows it's not entirely his business but can't quite stop himself, "what you're planning to do with the funds? Only because a withdrawal of this size, we want to make sure we're handling everything safely on our end." "I'm going to move it," I said. "I've decided to bank elsewhere." A pause. "I see." He wrote something down. "Is there any way we might Oh, no," I said. "There isn't." He nodded slowly. He was professional enough not to push. He turned back to the terminal, began the process of initiating the transfer paperwork, and that was when the glass office door opened. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. Victoria moved fast when she was alarmed. She always had, even as a child. There was something about her gait when she was worried that was different from her usual managed pace, a kind of coiled urgency that she couldn't fully smooth over no matter how polished she'd made herself. I had heard those footsteps 100 times in the years before she forgot that I was the one who had taught her to walk. She appeared at the edge of the counter area. She was still in her cream blazer. Her hair was still perfect. But her face? Her face was doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. There was color high on her cheeks. Her jaw was tight. "Mr. Donovan," she said. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the wire underneath it. "Is everything all right out here? I saw some activity and wanted to make sure." "Everything is fine, Victoria," he said, and his use of her first name was careful. Not dismissive, but a quiet signal that he had this handled and didn't need her. She looked at me. For the first time since I had walked into that bank, she looked at me directly. Not past me. Not through me. At me. And I looked back. I had thought, in the abstract, about what it would feel like to be in this moment. I had imagined that I might feel triumphant, or vindicated, or some version of the satisfaction that comes when the world rearranges itself in a way that finally makes sense. I had imagined that there might be something clean about it. There was nothing clean about it. What I felt, looking at my daughter's face in that moment, was grief. Just grief. The same grief that had been accumulating in me for 15 years, layer by layer, the way sediment builds. The missed Christmases, the unanswered calls, the half-second pauses before she said my name in company, the way she had looked away from me in that lobby not 20 minutes ago. All of it was still there. The number I had said hadn't dissolved any of it. But I did not look away from her. That much I could do. "Mother," she said, and the word came out differently than I expected. Quieter, almost involuntary, as if it had escaped before she could catch it. "Victoria," I said. She stepped closer to the counter. She dropped her voice to something low and urgent, the kind of volume that was meant to exclude everyone else while pretending the conversation was private. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Closing my account," I said. "You... What account? What are you—" She stopped. She looked at the terminal screen. Mr. Donovan had half-turned to give us a degree of privacy, but the numbers were visible, and she was close enough to see them. I watched her read the balance. I watched her read it again. I watched something move across her face that I had not seen there in years, raw and unmanaged and very, very young-looking. "That's not—" she started. "That can't be—" "It is," I said. She looked at me. "For how long?" she whispered. "Since your grandfather died," I said. 12 years. The color drained from her face so completely and so quickly that for one moment I was her mother again in a way I hadn't been in years, checking instinctively to see if she needed to sit down. She didn't sit down. She straightened instead, the way she always did when something threatened to undo her composure, and she said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be the one she used in meetings, "I think we should talk about this privately." "I think I'm in the middle of a transaction," I said. "Mother." Her voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "Please." It was the please that nearly broke me. Not because it was convincing. Not because it came from a place of genuine understanding or remorse or even love. But because I could hear underneath it the child who used to fall asleep on my shoulder on long bus rides, who once cried for an hour because she thought she had heard a bird that turned out to be perfectly fine, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard like they were the most precious things in the world. That child was still somewhere inside the woman in the cream blazer. I believed that. I had to believe that because the alternative was a grief I wasn't ready to carry. But that child was not the one who had looked away from me in the lobby this morning. "I'll call you when I'm done here," I said, and I turned back to Mr. Donovan. I want to tell you what the next 40 minutes felt like, because it was not what you'd expect. People imagine that moments of power are exhilarating, that when the world reverses itself and the person who is dismissed becomes the one everyone is attending to, there's a rush of something, energy, satisfaction, the particular pleasure of watching the scales tip. Movies are built on that feeling. It's the music swelling moment, the slow turn, the triumphant walk. That's not what 40 minutes in a bank feels like when you're 70 and your knees hurt, and the transaction you're initiating will sever the last financial connection you have to the institution where your daughter built her career. What it felt like was exhausting. Mr. Donovan brought in 2 additional staff members. They were courteous, efficient, genuinely kind in a way that made me think they were the kind of people who would have been kind to me even if the number on the screen had been 200 instead of 3.5 million. Forms were produced. I signed my name 7 times. I was offered water twice and coffee once, and I accepted the water the second time because my mouth had gone dry. Victoria did not return to her office. I could see her through the periphery of my vision. She had moved to the far side of the lobby, standing near a pillar, still holding the folder she'd had when she came out. She had her phone in her other hand and was doing something on it, but I could tell she wasn't really looking at the screen. She kept glancing over. There were customers in the lobby who were openly watching now. Not all of them, and most were making some effort to look as though they weren't, but when a regional director comes downstairs and a private transaction of that scale is initiated in the main area, things move in ways that people notice. I heard one woman say something to her companion in a low voice. I caught the words branch manager and her mother. I didn't hear the rest. At one point, one of the tellers, not the young man who had helped me originally, but a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and hoop earrings, slid a small paper cup of water across the counter to me without being asked, and said simply, "Take your time." I thanked her. I meant it more than she probably knew. When the paperwork was nearly complete, Mr. Donovan asked me gently where I'd like the funds transferred. I gave him the information for the account I had already set up at a different institution. I had done this 2 weeks ago, quietly, after a particularly difficult phone call with Victoria that had ended with her hanging up while I was mid-sentence. I had told myself then that I was just being prudent, just putting things in order. I hadn't fully admitted to myself what I was preparing for. Looking back, I think part of me had known for a long time that this morning was coming. I had just kept hoping I was wrong. "Everything looks in order," Mr. Donovan said, reviewing the completed forms. "The full transfer will clear within 3 to 5 business days. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mrs. Carter?" "There's one more thing," I said. He looked up. "I'd like to close the account entirely," I said. "Not just the transfer. I want the account closed." He nodded slowly. "Of course, I'll have that process today." I signed the final form, and then I picked up my purse from the counter, my mother's purse, worn smooth at the handle from years of use, worth nothing to anyone who didn't know where it came from. And I held it in my hands for a moment and felt the familiar weight of it. The leather was warm. I thought about my father, William Carter, who had gone to work every morning of his life and never complained and never explained and never once told me what he was quietly building in the background. I thought about how he used to say, when I was small, that the loudest thing about a person doesn't have to be their money. He said it didn't matter how much you had. What mattered was what you did with the part of yourself that had nothing to do with money at all. I had not thought about those words in years. Standing at the counter, I thought about them now. I turned around. Victoria was still near the pillar. When she saw me move, she straightened, pushed herself away from it, and walked toward me. She had recovered some of her composure in the time it had taken me to complete the transaction. The flush in her face had faded, the jaw was less tight, and she had found her way back to something that looked more like the version of herself she showed the world. But her eyes hadn't finished their recovery. "Can we please talk?" she said. We were standing in the middle of the lobby. I was aware of the people around us. I was aware that this was not a private conversation. "All right," I said. She looked briefly around her and lowered her voice. "Not here. My office. Here is fine," I said. Her jaw worked for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her. "Tell you what, Victoria?" About all of it." She gestured vaguely toward the counter, toward the space where the paperwork had just been completed. "About what Granddad left you. About the account. Why would you keep something like that from me?" I could hear, underneath the question, what she was really asking. It was the thing she couldn't quite bring herself to say directly. "Why didn't you tell me so I could have known? Why didn't you tell me so I could have adjusted?" "Because I wanted to know something," I said. "Know what?" "Whether you would treat me with dignity if you didn't know what I had." The lobby was very quiet. Victoria stared at me. I watched the words land, watched her process them, watched something move across her face that she didn't have the words to answer immediately. "That's not fair," she said finally. "You were testing me." "I was loving you," I said, "and watching what you did with it." The color came back to her face, but differently this time. Not the flustered red of embarrassment, something more complicated and harder to name. I wasn't trying to. She stopped, started again. "Mother, I was trying to protect my professional reputation. You can't walk into my bank and—" "Your bank," I said. She stopped. "This is your grandfather's money," I said. "In his bank, where you work. Where you told your wealthy client this morning that the lobby gets all kinds. Where you said, in front of everyone, that someone requesting $200 should find a more appropriate institution." I paused. "That someone was your mother." The silence between us lasted a long time. A woman near the door had stopped pretending to look at her phone. "I didn't mean it like that," Victoria said, and her voice had lost its professional architecture completely. It was just her voice now, thinner than usual, the voice she had before she learned to perform. "I didn't know it was you listening." "That's exactly the problem," I said. She opened her mouth, closed it. "You didn't know it was me," I said, "so you thought it was all right. That's not a mistake, Victoria. That's a character. That's the character you've been building for 15 years, piece by piece, and I've been watching it happen and telling myself you were just under pressure, just finding your way, just going through a phase that would pass." My voice was steady. I had not raised it once. "It didn't pass." Her eyes were bright now, and I recognized what that meant. "You're embarrassing me," she said. It came out like a reflex. Something in me went very still. "I'm embarrassing you," I repeated. "There are people watching," she said quietly. "Can we please just—" "Do you know what it felt like," I said, "to stand at that counter and be told that my withdrawal wasn't appropriate for this establishment? By my own daughter, in front of strangers." I stopped. I took one breath. "Do you have any idea at all what that felt like?" She didn't answer. "I raised you alone," I said. "I worked double shifts for 11 years so you could finish school without debt. I wore the same 3 pairs of shoes for 6 years. I didn't take a vacation once in the entire decade it took to get you through college. I was not ashamed of any of that. I was not embarrassed by it. I was proud of it." I looked at her. "The only time I have ever felt ashamed in my life is today. Standing in this lobby, being made to feel like a problem to be managed by the person I sacrificed everything for." Victoria's mouth trembled. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came out rough, like they'd had to force their way through something. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "You did mean it," I said quietly. "Not all of it, but enough of it. And I think somewhere in you, you know that." I picked up my purse. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, the way I hadn't allowed myself to in years, because looking too directly at the distance between who she was and who I had hoped she would become was something I had been protecting myself from. She looked like what she was, a woman who had built something impressive on a foundation that was cracking and who had just felt the first significant crack. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I want you to understand that. I'm doing it because the only other option is to keep letting this happen. And I'm 70 years old and I'm done." She reached out and touched my arm, just barely, just the tips of her fingers on my sleeve. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Home," I said. "And then what?" I thought about that for a moment. "I haven't decided yet," I said, "but for the first time in a long time, that's going to be entirely up to me." I walked toward the door. The lobby was quiet enough that I could hear my own footsteps on the marble. I did not walk quickly. I did not look back. Outside, the morning had gotten warmer. The buses were still running. The city was still doing what cities do, indifferent and enormous and full of people carrying their own particular weights. I stood on the sidewalk outside Westbridge Financial Center and I breathed the outside air. My hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time. Not from the effort of holding myself together. From something that took me a moment to identify, because it had been so long since I had felt it. Relief. Just simple, aching relief. The glass door behind me opened. I turned. Victoria was standing in the doorway of the bank. She hadn't followed me all the way out. She was standing on the threshold, half inside and half out, as if she couldn't decide which world she belonged to. Her cream blazer caught the light. She had her folder still in her hand. She looked for a moment like someone who had forgotten her lines. "The money," she started. Then she stopped. Then she started again. "Is it really all gone? Is it all in the transfer?" I looked at my daughter. I wondered what it cost her in that moment to make that the first question. I wondered if she knew how much it cost me to hear it. "Yes," I said. "It's all in the transfer." She nodded slowly. Something moved across her face that I couldn't name, and I had known her face for 50 years, which meant that the thing crossing it was something she had developed after she stopped letting me close enough to know her. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." I turned back toward the street. The number 14 bus was 3 blocks down. I could see it moving through the morning traffic, slow and steady, carrying people who needed to be somewhere else. I needed to be somewhere else too. I started walking. Behind me, I heard the glass door of the bank close. The sound of it was final, in a way that settled into my chest and stayed there. Not like a wound, not exactly, more like the end of a very long story that I had been telling myself for years. The story about my daughter and what she was going to become, and how patient I needed to be, and how love was enough if you just kept offering it. The end of that story felt like a door closing. What came next, I was still figuring out. But I was figuring it out outside of that building, on my own feet, with my mother's purse on my arm and 12 years of secret weight finally lifted off my shoulders. And that was more than I had walked in with. The bus came to a stop at the corner. I got on. I found a seat by the window the same way I always did, and I watched the glass building of Westbridge Financial shrink in the distance as the bus pulled away. Somewhere inside it, my daughter was standing in a lobby full of people who had just watched her world rearrange itself. Somewhere inside it, a regional director was completing the paperwork that would officially close an account that had sat untouched for 12 years. Somewhere inside it, a young teller with red ears was probably still processing what he'd witnessed. And I was on a bus, watching it all get smaller through a scratched window, with no plan and no map, and more money than I had ever let myself fully acknowledge, and a grief in my chest that the money couldn't touch. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window. The city moved past me. I let it. The transfer cleared on a Thursday. I know because I was sitting at my kitchen table when the notification came through on the small tablet my neighbor Ruth had helped me set up the previous winter. It was a simple message: account confirmation, transfer complete, balance updated. The kind of bureaucratic language that doesn't know or care what it means to the person reading it. I stared at it for a long time. Outside my window, someone was mowing a lawn 2 houses down, and the smell of cut grass came through the screen door. And I sat there in my kitchen thinking about how strange it was that the world kept doing its ordinary things while something that had taken 12 years to arrive was completing itself in a single line of text on a small screen. I had not heard from Victoria in the 4 days since I left the bank. 4 days of silence from my daughter was not unusual. There had been stretches much longer than that. Weeks, once, nearly 2 months the year she made senior manager and disappeared into the machinery of her own ambition so completely that I had started to wonder if I had imagined the relationship we used to have. But this silence was different in quality from those silences. Those had been the silence of someone too busy to call. This was the silence of someone sitting with something they didn't know how to face. I recognized the difference because I knew her, even now, even after everything. Mothers carry maps of their children that don't stop being accurate just because the children have changed. I made myself a cup of tea and sat with the notification on the screen and tried to figure out what I was supposed to feel. What I actually felt was complicated in a way that didn't resolve neatly into anything I could name. There was relief, still. The same relief I had felt on the bus, solid and real underneath everything else. But there was also a kind of grief that had been there for so long it had started to feel like furniture. And there was something new that I hadn't entirely expected. A low, persistent anxiety, not about the money, but about what came next. About what a woman of 70 does with the first chapter of her life that belongs entirely to herself. I had never written that chapter before. I didn't know where to start. The call came on a Friday evening, just after 7. I was in the middle of making soup, the kind my mother used to make, simple and thick with whatever vegetables were going soft in the refrigerator. When my phone rang on the counter, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and looked at the screen. It wasn't Victoria. It was a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Carter?" A woman's voice. Professional, careful, with an undertone of urgency she was trying to keep out of the way. "This is Margaret Osei. I'm an attorney. I'm calling because I've been asked to reach out to you on behalf of Westbridge Financial Center's legal team." A pause. "I want to be very clear that I'm not calling to pressure you or discuss the legitimacy of your transaction. I'm calling because something has come to my attention that I believe you have a right to know." I turned the burner down under the pot. "Go ahead," I said. She took a breath. "In the course of reviewing account activity related to your closure, our compliance team flagged some historical transactions on your account that occurred over the past 4 years. Transfers out. Small ones. Never large enough to trigger automatic review. But in aggregate, Mrs. Carter, they're significant." She paused again. "We're talking about somewhere in the range of $60,000. I sat down on the nearest kitchen chair. The soup was still making soft sounds on the stove. The smell of it filled the kitchen. Everything in the room was completely ordinary, and I sat in the middle of it feeling the floor shift underneath me. $60,000, I said. "Over 4 years, she said. "The transfers were initiated online from an IP address that our technical team has traced to." She stopped, started again. "I want to be careful about how I say this, because this is an ongoing matter and there are legal processes that need to be followed. But the IP address traces back to a device registered to Westbridge Financial Center, to the branch on Alderman and 5th. I held the phone against my ear and listened to myself breathe. "Are you saying," I said slowly, "that someone at the bank was taking money from my account?" "I'm saying that's what the preliminary investigation suggests," Margaret Osei said carefully. "I'm not in a position to name anyone to you at this stage. But given the circumstances surrounding your account closure and the public nature of what occurred in the branch on Tuesday, I felt you had the right to know before this becomes an official inquiry." She paused. "Mrs. Carter, do you have legal representation?" I thought about Mr. Aldridge, my father's attorney, who had retired 3 years ago, and whose number I still had in my phone even though I'd never called it since. "Not currently," I said. "I'd strongly recommend you get some," she said. "Quickly." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time without moving. The soup went cold. I want to tell you what it's like to sit with a suspicion that your own daughter stole from you. Not a suspicion that came out of nowhere. That's important to say. There had been small things over the years, a transaction I'd noticed once that I couldn't account for and then convinced myself I had miscalculated. A balance that seemed slightly lower than I expected 1 month, which I had attributed to my own aging memory. Small things that I had filed under explanations that felt more comfortable than the truth. I had been very good at finding more comfortable explanations. Sitting in my kitchen on a Friday night, I ran through every one of those comfortable explanations again, and one by one, they failed. The transfers were small because small transfers don't get flagged. 4 years, because 4 years is long enough to accumulate something significant without any single moment becoming obvious. And the IP address, a device registered to that branch, to that building, to the place where my daughter had been manager for 6 years. Victoria had my account information. She had always had my account information because I had given it to her years ago during a period when I was having some health difficulties, and I wanted someone to be able to access things if something happened to me. I had trusted her with it. I had thought that was what you did with the people you loved. I sat there and I thought about the cream blazer and the polished laugh and the way she had said your grandfather's money in the lobby as if it were a concept rather than something real. I thought about the carefully managed apartment I had visited twice in 6 years, with its clean lines and expensive furniture, and the way it had made me feel like I was tracking in something every time I stepped through the door. $60,000. I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen table and breathed. Then I picked up my phone and called the number for Mr. Aldridge's old firm. His replacement was a woman named Carla Winters. She was in her mid-40s, direct in a way I found immediately reassuring, and when I explained the situation to her in a phone call on Saturday morning, she listened without interrupting, which in my experience is rarer than it should be. "Okay," she said when I finished. "First things first. Don't contact your daughter. Not yet. Not until we know more about the investigation and what the bank's compliance team has or hasn't documented." She paused. "Can you access your account statements for the past 4 years?" "I have the new tablet," I said. "My neighbor helped me set it up. I think I can pull them online." "Pull everything you can and send it to me. Every statement, going back as far as the portal allows." She paused again. "Mrs. Carter, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. Did your daughter ever ask you for money directly?" I thought about that. "Once," I said, "about 3 years ago. She said she was going through a difficult patch. She asked for a loan. She said $20,000, that she'd pay it back." "Did you give it to her?" "I told her I didn't have that kind of money easily accessible," I said. "I was protecting the secret about the account." She seemed frustrated. She dropped it after that. Silence on Carla's end. "Okay," she said, and there was something in that word that told me she was assembling things. "Let me make some calls. Get me those statements. And please, don't contact Victoria." I said I wouldn't. I pulled the statements that afternoon, all 48 months of them, and sat at my kitchen table going through them line by line. Ruth sat with me. She had come over to help with the tablet and ended up staying, the way good neighbors do when they can tell something is wrong. And between the two of us, we found them. 14 transfers over 4 years, ranging from $2,000 to $7,000, all processed on weekday mornings, all going to an account that wasn't in my name. I had looked at these statements before, across the years. I had seen these transactions. I had simply not seen them, or seen them and found a reason each time to explain them as something I had authorized and forgotten. The human capacity for not wanting to know something is extraordinary. I say that without self-pity. I say it because I think most of us have experienced it in one form or another. The way we look at a thing that will hurt us and our eyes find a way to slide past it, to see something less painful in its place. It's not stupidity, it's survival. It's the brain protecting itself from a wound it doesn't think it can carry. I could carry it now. I didn't have a choice. "Oh, Evelyn," Ruth said quietly when we found the 14th one. "Don't," I said. She put her hand over mine on the table and didn't say anything else. Carla called me on Monday. "The bank's compliance team has confirmed the source IP for all 14 transactions," she said. "They've handed the matter to their fraud department. You're going to be hearing from them formally, probably by the end of the week." She paused. "Evelyn, the bank is going to have to report this to law enforcement. It's past the threshold for internal resolution. What this means practically is that there's going to be an investigation, and Victoria is going to be a named subject of that investigation." I closed my eyes. "I understand," I said. I want to make sure you understand what that means, Carla said, gently but clearly. This isn't something you can ask them to make go away. The bank has a legal obligation to report once fraud above a certain threshold is confirmed. Your wishes in the matter are relevant to some aspects of how this proceeds, but not all of them. I understand, I said again. Is there anything you want to tell me before this moves forward? Anything that would change the picture? I thought about that question for a long time. I thought about all the things I had told myself over the years, about Victoria's potential, about her stress, about the pressure she was under, about how success sometimes made people into versions of themselves they didn't mean to become. I thought about the girl who brought me dandelions. I thought about the woman who had stood in the doorway of her bank with a folder in her hand, asking if the money was really all gone. No, I said, there's nothing that changes the picture. Carla said she'd be in touch. I sat in the quiet of my living room and looked at the old leather purse on the table across from me, and I tried to figure out what a mother was supposed to do with the knowledge that her child had taken from her. Not just the money, but the years of not knowing, the years of blaming herself for the distance, the years of wondering what she had done wrong when all along the wrong was being done to her in the background, one small transfer at a time. I didn't figure it out that day. I'm not sure I figured it out entirely even now. Victoria called on a Tuesday. 8 days after the morning at the bank. I saw her name on the screen and I sat with it for 3 full rings before I answered. Carla had said not to contact Victoria. She hadn't said I couldn't answer if Victoria called. It was a thin distinction, but it was the one I was working with. Hello? I said. A silence. Then, I know you probably don't want to talk to me. Her voice was different. All the professional polish was gone, not just the surface of it, but the scaffolding underneath it. She sounded like she had been awake for several days, which I suspected was accurate. I'm listening, I said. Another silence. I could hear her breathing. I got a letter, she said, from the bank's legal team. Her voice wobbled slightly on the word legal and then steadied. They're suspending my employment pending an investigation. A pause. I think you know what it's about. I didn't say anything. I need to know, she said. Was it you who asked them to look? The inquiry started when they reviewed the account activity related to my closure, I said carefully. I didn't have to ask for anything. The numbers asked for themselves. A long silence. Victoria, I said, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Not the version of the truth that makes it easier, the actual truth. She didn't answer right away. I waited. Did you take money from my account? I said. The silence that followed that question was the longest one of the entire conversation. It stretched out between us like a road that both of us were standing at opposite ends of, and neither of us was walking toward the other. Then she said, very quietly, yes. The word hit me differently than I expected. Not like a revelation. I had known, or near enough to known, since Saturday at the kitchen table with Ruth. But knowing something and hearing it confirmed are 2 entirely different experiences. Knowing is something you can still partially protect yourself from. Hearing it confirmed removes the last thin layer of protection. How much? I said. I don't know exactly. She stopped. Around 60. $60,000, I said. Yes. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Why? I said. And this is the part that I had thought about for days. I had prepared myself for excuses. I had prepared myself for the kind of elaborate self-justifications that people construct when they've done something they can't take back. The explanations that make the person sound like a victim of circumstances rather than the author of a choice. I had heard enough of those in my life to be ready for them. What I heard instead was silence. And then something that wasn't quite a sob but was close to it. And then, I needed it. And I told myself you didn't know about it, so you wouldn't miss it. And I told myself I'd put it back, and then I didn't. And then more time went by, and I told myself the same thing again. A pause. I know that doesn't make it okay. No, I said. It doesn't. I know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know. I sat in my living room with the phone in my hand and looked at the afternoon light coming through the window, the way it fell across the floor in long, pale rectangles. I thought about the word need. I thought about what need had looked like in my own life. The years of double shifts, the worn shoes, the vacations I never took. I thought about what I had done with my need and what my daughter had done with hers. I worked for 50 years, I said. I never took anything that wasn't mine. I know, she said. I raised you not to. I know. The wobble was back in her voice. I know you did. Then why? I said. Not angrily. I was past anger by then, or at least past the kind of anger that wants to express itself loudly. What I felt was something more like a vast, exhausted bewilderment. Why, Victoria? Because you wanted more than you had? Because I was just there? Because you figured I was old and confused and wouldn't notice? Because I was ashamed, she said. I didn't expect that. Of what? I said. Of needing it. She took a shaky breath. I was in debt. Real debt. Not just the kind that looks manageable from the outside. I had made some bad investments. I had kept my lifestyle going past what my salary could actually support. And I couldn't ask you directly, because that would have meant admitting it, and I couldn't admit it to you of all people. Her voice broke slightly. Because you never asked for anything from anyone. Because you would have found a way. And I couldn't stand the idea of you knowing that I couldn't. I held the phone. I thought about the pride she was describing. I recognized it. I had given it to her, or some version of it. The deep, stubborn unwillingness to let anyone see the gap between what you had and what you needed. I had modeled it my entire life. I had thought it was strength. Sitting there, I wondered, for the first time, if I had also modeled something that trapped her. That thought did not excuse what she did. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Stealing from your aging mother because you were too proud to admit you needed help is not something that gets explained away by childhood lessons about self-sufficiency. The act was wrong. The method was calculated. The 4 years of it were not a moment of weakness, but a sustained choice, repeated 14 times. But the thought settled into me and stayed. Complicated things have a way of doing that. The bank's investigation is going forward, I said. There's nothing I can do to stop it. It passed the threshold. I heard her breath catch. I know, she said. You're going to need a lawyer, I said. A good one. Not because I want to see you punished, but because the process is going to move whether either of us wants it to or not, and you need to be represented. Are you pressing charges on top of... I'm going to let the process happen, I said, and I'm going to work with my attorney on what role I want to play in it. I can't make you any promises right now. I'm not in a position to. A long pause. Okay, she said. The same word she had said at the bank door, but it sounded different now. Smaller, less like a door closing and more like someone sitting down on the floor because they didn't have the strength to stand. Victoria, I said. Yeah. I want to ask you something else, and this is the one that matters more to me than the money. I heard her still. Did you know, I said, when you were doing what you were doing, taking what you were taking, did you know somewhere in yourself that it was wrong? The silence that followed was the most honest thing she had offered me in years. Yes, she said. Every time? A pause. Yes, she said again. I closed my eyes. Okay, I said. Mom? And that was the first time she had called me that in so long I couldn't immediately remember the last time. Not mother, not Evelyn, the way she used it sometimes when she wanted to put distance between us in professional settings. Mom. The word I had been to her before she decided I was something to manage. It broke something open in me that I had been keeping sealed. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that too. I had done my crying privately over the previous week, in the small hours of mornings I couldn't sleep, and I had decided somewhere in those hours that I was done spending my tears on things I couldn't change. But something opened anyway, some door I had been holding shut without knowing I was holding it, and through it came the full weight of everything this woman had been to me and done to me and cost me across 50 years of loving her. I need some time, I said. I need a lot of time. I can't tell you what any of this looks like on the other side because I don't know yet. I understand, she said, but I need you to do something for me, I said. While the process moves forward, while you're dealing with the legal consequences of this. Anything, she said, and the quickness of it, the desperation of it, told me how little ground she had left. I need you to think about who you've become, I said. Not who you were trying to become. Not who you wanted people to see. Who you actually became day by day, choice by choice. I need you to look at that clearly. Not so you can feel bad about it. Feeling bad about it isn't the point and it doesn't fix anything. But so you can decide with your eyes actually open who you want to be next. She didn't say anything for a moment. I don't know if I can do that, she said finally. I know, I said. Do it anyway. I hung up. I sat in my living room with the phone in my lap, and outside the window the afternoon was doing what afternoons do, moving toward evening slowly, the light going golden and then softer, the neighborhood quieting down as people came home and made their dinners and walked their dogs and had no idea that 2 blocks away a 70-year-old woman was sitting in a chair trying to understand how much of what had happened to her was her fault and how much was simply the consequence of loving someone more than they knew how to be loved. I don't have a clean answer to that. I want to be honest about that. People tell you that healing is a process, and they're right, but they make it sound more organized than it actually is. They make it sound like a thing you move through in a direction. The truth is that it's more like weather. It comes and goes, and you're never entirely sure what's going to set it off. And sometimes on a Tuesday afternoon, for no particular reason, you find yourself hollowed out by something you thought you had already gotten past. What I did know, sitting there, was this. The bank account was transferred. The fraud investigation was underway. My daughter had said yes when I asked her if she knew, and I had said what I needed to say without losing myself in the saying of it. That was enough for one Tuesday. It had to be. But something else was sitting at the edges of my thinking, something that had been forming slowly over the past week in the background of everything else, an idea that had started as a vague shape and was becoming gradually more defined. I had spent all week thinking about what I had lost, about the money and the years, and the version of my daughter I had been grieving for so long. I had not yet thought very much about what I still had. I had $3.5 million. Less $60,000, and less whatever the legal process would cost me, sitting in a new account in a new bank. I had my health, imperfect but present. I had Ruth next door who had sat with me at a kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon and not said the wrong thing. I had my father's purse still sitting on the table across the room, carrying whatever it carried that I couldn't name but felt whenever I held it. And I had something else, something I had been reaching toward without quite knowing what to call it. I was 70 years old, and for the first time in that entire span of years, I had nothing left to protect except myself. That was terrifying. It was also, I was beginning to understand, the closest thing to freedom I had ever held in my hands. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got up, went back to the kitchen, and reheated the soup. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly, then suddenly, then slowly again. Carla kept me informed without overwhelming me, which I appreciated more than I told her. She had a gift for translating the procedural machinery of the law into language that didn't make me feel like I was drowning. And she was honest with me in a way that good attorneys sometimes aren't. She told me when things were going badly as readily as when they were going well, without softening either into something more comfortable than it was. The fraud investigation took 11 weeks in total. 11 weeks of documentation requests and depositions and phone calls I didn't entirely understand, and paperwork that arrived in envelopes with official seals. 11 weeks during which Victoria retained her own attorney, a man named Garrett Foss, who had a reputation, Carla told me neutrally, for being effective, and during which we did not speak at all because both our legal teams had advised against it. I had expected the silence of those 11 weeks to feel like the silences before, like absence, like being looked through, like the particular loneliness of being a mother whose child had decided she was not worth the effort of maintaining contact. But it didn't feel like that. It felt different in a way that took me a while to identify. It felt chosen. For the first time, the silence between Victoria and me was not something that had been done to me. It was something I was participating in deliberately, for my own reasons, on my own terms. That distinction sounds small. It was not small. The difference between a silence that is imposed on you and a silence that you choose is the difference between being buried and choosing to be still. The physical facts might look the same from the outside, but the internal experience is completely opposite. I used the 11 weeks. That's not how I had expected to spend them. I had thought I would spend them waiting for the process to conclude, for a resolution, for the shape of what came next to become clear enough that I could plan around it. Waiting was what I knew how to do. I had spent a significant portion of my adult life waiting for things to change, waiting for Victoria to come around, waiting for her to call back, waiting for the version of her I believed was still in there to find its way back to the surface. But somewhere in the first 2 weeks of the investigation, I stopped waiting. I'm not sure exactly when it happened. There wasn't a single moment, no particular morning when I woke up and decided. It was more like something that crept up on me while I was occupied with other things. The realization that I had been holding myself in a position of readiness for so long that I had forgotten I was doing it. Like a runner frozen in starting position who finally straightens up and walks off the track. The first thing I did was call a woman named Diane Okafor. I had met Diane at a community meeting 2 years earlier. One of those neighborhood association events I attended occasionally, more for the structure of having somewhere to be on a Thursday evening than out of any deep investment in local zoning disputes. She had been there because she ran a small nonprofit on the east side of the city called Steadfast Women, which provided emergency financial assistance and transitional support to women over 60 who had been left financially vulnerable by divorce, death of a spouse, or family exploitation. I had sat next to her for 3 hours while a man named Gerald from the Homeowners Association talked about drainage. We had exchanged perhaps 12 words, but she had given me her card at the end of the evening, the way some people do. Not in the aggressive way of networking, but in the quieter way of someone who recognizes something in you that they can't quite name and decides to leave a door open. I had kept the card in the small dish on my kitchen counter where I kept things I didn't want to lose. I called her on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of the investigation. I told her who I was. She remembered me from the drainage meeting, which surprised me. I told her in brief that I had come into a significant sum of money and that I was trying to figure out what to do with some portion of it in a way that would matter. "What kind of mattering are you thinking about?" she asked. "Mothers," I said. "Women who gave everything they had to their families and ended up with nothing to show for it. Women who are invisible because they're old and don't have money and nobody is looking at them." A pause. "Come have coffee with me," Diane said. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a textile factory and now housed a collection of nonprofits and small organizations that couldn't afford the newer buildings downtown. The elevator was unreliable, so I took the stairs. The walls of the stairwell were painted the particular shade of institutional green that said someone had been given a budget and a gallon of paint and not much else. And there were flyers tacked to the corkboard on each landing. English classes, food pantry hours, legal aid clinics, a support group for women navigating elder care. I stood in front of that corkboard on the 2nd floor landing and looked at those flyers for a long moment. All of it, every single piece of paper on that board, was someone trying to help someone else hold their life together. That was all. No fanfare, no capital letters, no grand mission statements, just people trying to make sure that other people didn't fall through the cracks, that the bigger world was too busy to notice. I took the last flight of stairs and knocked on Diane's door. She was a tall woman in her early 60s with natural gray locks and reading glasses that she wore on top of her head the way Helen Park did. Though on Diane it looked less like a professional affectation and more like she just kept putting them there and forgetting. Her office was small and crowded with files and had a window that looked out over the back parking lot and a peace lily on the windowsill that had seen better days but was clearly still trying. "Evelyn Carter," she said, extending her hand. "Sit down. I made real coffee, not the pod kind." I sat down. She poured 2 cups and pushed one across the desk toward me and folded her hands and looked at me with the particular attention of someone who is actually going to listen to what you say. I told her more than I had told her on the phone. Not everything. Not the fraud investigation, not the full details of what Victoria had done. But I told her about the bank, about the morning with the $200, about the 12 years of the secret account, and what it had been a test for and what the test had revealed. I told her about how I had spent decades in the background of my own life, making myself smaller so that other people could feel bigger. I told her about the women I had known throughout my life who had done the same thing. Women from my neighborhood, women I had worked with, women I saw on the bus and at the pharmacy and in the waiting rooms of doctors' offices, women who had poured everything they had into their families and arrived at old age with nothing but the pouring out, and who had no one looking at them like they mattered. Diane listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Not what do you want to give, not what are you thinking of funding. What do you want to do?" "I want to build something," I said. "Not a fund, not a check written once a year to something with a good name. I want to build something that stays, something that these women can walk into and feel like they're being seen, not processed." Diane looked at me for a long moment. "Have you ever run an organization before?" she asked. "No," I said. "Do you know anything about nonprofit governance or grant administration or financial compliance for charitable entities?" "No," I said. "Good," she said. "People who don't know anything yet are easier to work with than people who think they know everything already." She picked up her coffee. "What are you thinking in terms of scope?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Something real, something that doesn't disappear in 2 years because the funding dried up." "Endowment," she said. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "How much are we talking about?" I told her the number I had been considering. It was not the full amount of what I had. I was not reckless, whatever else I might have been in those weeks. But it was significant, real. Diane set her coffee cup down very carefully. "Evelyn," she said, "I think we need to talk seriously." We talked for 3 hours. Chit. I won't pretend that what followed was smooth. It was not smooth. Building something real never is, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a version of events that has been edited for palatability. There were weeks where the paperwork alone felt like a second job, which, in a way, it was. Carla helped me navigate the legal structure, recommending a separate attorney for the nonprofit filings, a woman named Joyce Ton, who was brisk and precise and sent emails at 6 in the morning that somehow weren't alarming once I got used to them. Diane connected me with a board development consultant who helped us identify the right people to involve in the governance structure. People who understood the community we were trying to serve, who had relationships and credibility in spaces I didn't, who brought knowledge I didn't have, and weren't too polished to admit when something wasn't working. I named it the Second Chance Foundation. Not because the name was original. Diane pointed out gently that there were 17 other nonprofits in the country with variations of that name, but because it said exactly what I meant, and I had spent enough of my life trying to say things in ways that were more sophisticated than they needed to be. Second chance. That was what I wanted to give. Not a first chance. Most of the women we were trying to reach had already built entire lives, had already sacrificed and worked and shown up. They didn't need a first chance. They needed someone to recognize that they deserved another one. The first intake coordinator I hired was a woman named Patricia Nguyen, who was 58 years old, had spent 22 years as a social worker for the county, and had left that job the year before because the bureaucracy had finally worn her down past what she could sustain. She was practical in a way that grounded me when I got too caught up in the idea of what we were building, and she was kind in a way that never curdled into sentimentality, which is the rarest combination I know. The women who need this most, Patricia told me in her first week, are not the ones who are going to walk through the door easily. They're not going to see a flyer and call the number. They've spent their whole lives being told that what they need isn't important enough to ask for. We're going to have to go to them. Then we go to them, I said. That costs more than a waiting room, she said. I know, I said. Budget for it. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I would learn to recognize over the following months. A kind of quiet recalibration. A person adjusting their expectations of a situation upward. Okay, she said. Good. The fraud investigation concluded in week 11 with a settlement agreement that Carla walked me through in a 2-hour meeting that I will not describe in full detail because the details, in their legal specificity, are less important than what they meant. What they meant was this. Victoria acknowledged the transfers. She repaid the full amount from her personal assets, which required her to liquidate significant portions of what she had built over 6 years of a manager's salary, the portfolio, the savings, and eventually a portion of the equity in her apartment. The criminal proceedings, which the bank had been obligated to initiate, resulted in a charge that Garrett Foss negotiated down to something that carried consequences without carrying the most catastrophic possible outcome. She lost her position at the bank permanently and was barred from working in financial services for 5 years. I had not intervened to make it easier for her. I want to say that clearly because people sometimes assume that a mother's natural instinct would be to protect her child from consequences, and I understand why they assume that. But I had spent 50 years protecting Victoria from things, and the results of that were visible to me in a way they hadn't been before. Protecting someone from consequences is not always love. Sometimes it is simply the postponement of an accounting that was always going to come. I did not make it harder for her either. I said what Carla told me I had the right to say when I was asked for my input, and I said it honestly, and then I let the process be what it was. When it was over, I sat in Carla's office, and she pushed a final folder across the desk toward me and said, "That's it, it's done." I opened the folder. I looked at the documents. I closed it. "Thank you," I said. "You handled this well," she said. "I mean that." I thought about all the ways I had not handled things well over the preceding decades. All the times I had looked away from something I should have looked at. All the times I had absorbed damage I should have named. All the times I had told myself that patience was the same thing as wisdom, when sometimes it was just fear wearing a quieter coat. "I'm still working on it," I said. She smiled. "Aren't we all?" The foundation opened its doors, figuratively, at first, and then literally, in the 6th month after my morning at the bank. We had a small suite of offices in the same building where I had first met with Diane, on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from her. The elevator had been repaired by then, though Patricia still preferred the stairs. We had a waiting area that I had furnished carefully, not expensively, but thoughtfully. Real chairs, not the plastic kind. Good lighting, the warm kind that didn't make you feel like you were being examined. A low table with magazines that were actually current. A small rack near the door with informational materials in 4 languages. Because Patricia had pointed out in our 2nd week that assuming everyone who needed us spoke English was the kind of assumption that kept people from walking through the door. On the wall opposite the waiting area chairs, I had hung one thing, a framed photograph of my mother, taken sometime in the 1960s, before I was born. She is standing in front of a house I don't recognize, wearing a dress I have never seen, squinting slightly into the sun. She's not looking at the camera. She's looking at something off to the side, something just outside the frame that I will never know. She looks like a woman who has decided something and is in the middle of acting on it. I had found the photograph in a box in my closet the week after the bank. I don't know how it got there, don't remember putting it away. But I found it, and when I held it, I felt the same thing I always felt when I held her purse, the texture of someone who was gone but still had weight. I put her on the wall because the women who came to us deserved to walk into a room where they were looked at, even if it was only by a woman in a photograph who had been young once and was looking at something just outside the frame. That might sound like a small thing. It wasn't. The first woman who came to us through Patricia's outreach work was named Gloria. She was 67. She had spent 40 years as a home health aide, then another decade as the primary caregiver for her husband after his stroke. When he died, she discovered that her son-in-law had, over the course of those 10 years, gradually moved her husband's assets into accounts she had no access to. She had a house, her name was on the deed, and almost nothing else. She came into the office on a Tuesday morning, which I noticed because all the things that had changed my life seemed to happen on Tuesdays, and she sat in one of the chairs in the waiting area and held her handbag in her lap with both hands, and looked like a person who had spent a long time bracing herself for a door to close in her face before she even knocked on it. Patricia brought her a cup of tea, sat with her, listened to what she had. I was in my office that morning, going through foundation documents, and I could hear them through the partially open door. Not the words, just the rhythm of the conversation. The way it started careful and halting and gradually became more even. The way Patricia's voice stayed low and steady the whole time, never rushing, never redirecting to a form or a checklist until the woman across from her had finished saying what she needed to say. At one point I heard Gloria say, "I keep thinking I should have seen it coming. I keep thinking I was stupid." And I heard Patricia say, "You weren't stupid. You were trusting someone you had reason to trust. That's not stupidity. That's just what love looks like from the inside, and people who want to take advantage of it know exactly how to use it." I stopped pretending to read my documents. I sat in my office with my hands flat on the desk and listened to the silence after Patricia said that. And I thought about all the ways I had told myself I was stupid over the years. For not seeing, for not knowing, for believing that Victoria's distances were temporary and her returns were genuine. I had called it naivety, foolishness, the embarrassing softness of a mother who couldn't see clearly because she was too close. Patricia was right. It wasn't stupidity. It was trust. And trust, when it is real, when it comes from love rather than naivety, is not a flaw. The fault belongs to the one who took advantage of it, not the one who offered it. I hadn't fully believed that until I heard it said to someone else. Gloria came back the following week for a legal consultation with a pro bono attorney we had connected with. She came back the week after that for a financial counseling session. Slowly, carefully, with Patricia and our small team around her, she began the process of understanding what she had and what paths were available to her. It was not fast. It was not clean. There were setbacks. A document that couldn't be found. A court date that got postponed twice. A morning when she called Patricia from her car because she had driven to the appointment and then couldn't make herself go in. Patricia called me that morning. "She's in the parking lot," she said. "She can't come in today." "Okay," I said. "I'm going out there." "Yes, Sass," I said. "Go." Patricia went. She sat in the passenger seat of Gloria's car for 40 minutes. She didn't try to fix anything or push anything or convince Gloria of anything. She just sat with her. Sometimes that's the whole thing. Sometimes sitting with someone in a parking lot for 40 minutes is the most important thing anyone has done for them in years. Gloria came in the following week. She's still working through it. It's not a story with a clean ending yet. Most real things aren't. In the 4th month of the foundation's operation, I got a text message from a number I didn't have saved. "This is Victoria. I know you said you needed time, and I'm trying to respect that. I just wanted you to know that I've been going to therapy. I started 8 weeks ago. I'm not telling you this because I want anything from you. I just thought you should know." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on my desk and went back to what I was working on. I didn't respond that day. Or the next. I thought about it. I thought about it more than I expected to, which told me something about how much I had been managing rather than resolving. The part of me that had been her mother since before she could walk wanted to respond immediately, wanted to say something that would open the door, wanted to start the process of whatever came next. But there was another part of me, a part I was still getting used to listening to, that understood something important. Victoria sending a text was not the same thing as Victoria changing. It was a beginning, if it was genuine. Beginnings are not endings. And I had made the mistake, enough times in my life, of treating someone's beginnings as if they were the whole story. I texted back on the 3rd day. "Thank you for telling me. Keep going." 3 words. Not a door opening, not a door closing, just acknowledgement, just the bare minimum of the thread between us held visible. She wrote back, "I will." I put the phone down and went back to the foundation documents and thought about the difference between holding a door open and walking through it. How those are 2 entirely different commitments, and how knowing which one you're ready for requires a kind of honesty with yourself that I was still learning, at 70 years old, to practice consistently. Victoria was in therapy. That was real. That was more than she had done at any point in the preceding 15 years. Whether it would change anything, whether it would lead somewhere that resembled the relationship I had once hoped we would have, that I could not know. The wanting of a thing does not determine the outcome, and the history of wanting Victoria to be different than she was had taught me to be careful about the stories I told myself ahead of the evidence. But 3 words was something. It was not nothing. Int. 6 months after the foundation opened, we served 43 women. 43 women who had come to us through Patricia's outreach, through word of mouth, through a small piece in a local community newsletter that a volunteer had arranged. 43 women who had walked into that waiting room and sat in those chairs and held their handbags in their laps and had not had a door close in their faces. I thought about my mother's photograph on the wall, looking at something just outside the frame. I thought about what she would have made of all of it: the bank, the daughter, the money, the thing I was building. My mother had been a private woman, not given to long discussions of feelings. She had shown love through specific practical things: food on the table, a hand on a forehead when you were sick, a presence in the next room that you could feel even when she wasn't speaking. She had not been a woman who would have known what to do with an office and a staff and a foundation bearing a name. But she would have understood the waiting room. She would have understood the chairs and the lighting and the magazines and the photograph on the wall. She would have understood the impulse behind all of it, that the most foundational thing you can do for another person is make them feel, even briefly, like they are seen. She had done that for me my entire childhood, without ever calling it anything. I was finally learning to do it for other people. It wasn't a redemption arc. I want to be clear about that. This is the part where stories usually want to announce themselves as redemption, as transformation, as the beautiful thing that grows from the terrible thing. And something was growing, I won't deny that. But growing things are messy and slow and don't announce themselves. And I was still in the middle of it, still learning the work, still making mistakes, still waking up some mornings carrying a grief I thought I'd already put down. The foundation was not my healing. It was what I chose to do while I was healing. There's a difference, and the difference matters. What was healing was slower and quieter and happened mostly in private. In the conversations with Carla that moved gradually from legal to personal. In the friendship with Diane that deepened into something I hadn't had in years. In the dinners with Ruth where we talked about small things and the small things felt substantial. In the Saturday mornings when I sat with my mother's purse in my lap for no reason except that I wanted to and I could. I was 70 years old. I had closed an account that held 12 years of a secret and $3.5 million, and the answer to the question I had spent a decade and a half waiting to have answered. I had built something in the space where the secret used to be. I had 3 words from my daughter that were not enough and were not nothing. And I was still here, which some mornings felt like the most significant fact of all. Still here, still learning what it meant to take up space without apologizing for it. Still figuring out what a woman who had spent her life making herself smaller was supposed to do with the room she finally had. It was not a clean story. It was mine. The text messages continued for 3 months before they became phone calls. That was Victoria's doing, not mine. I had kept to what I said. I needed time, and time was what I was taking, without apology, and without the old reflex of rushing toward reconciliation just to relieve the discomfort of the distance. If there was one thing those 70 years had finally taught me, it was that discomfort is not an emergency. Discomfort is just what it feels like to wait for something real instead of settling for something fast. She texted every week or two, not long messages. She seemed to understand, either instinctively or because her therapist had told her that flooding me with words was not the same as giving me something worth reading. The messages were short, specific. She told me she had started volunteering at a food pantry on Saturday mornings, which surprised me. She told me she had sold the apartment, not because she had to, though the legal settlement had made her financial position significantly tighter, but because she had decided she didn't want to live in a place that reminded her of everything she had been performing. She told me she had moved into a smaller apartment on the north side, a rental, a place she described as having bad water pressure and a radiator that clanged at 3 in the morning and a view of a parking garage. She said she liked it better than she expected to. I read that particular message twice. I didn't know how to explain even to myself why that detail, the parking garage, the clanging radiator, moved me more than anything else she had written. But there was something in it that felt true in a way that her polished former life had never quite managed to feel. Something undefended about it. She wasn't trying to make it sound good. She was just telling me what was. I wrote back, "A view of a parking garage builds character." She sent back a single laughing emoji. It was not forgiveness. I want to be precise about that, because I think the word forgiveness gets used carelessly, and the careless use of it does damage. What passed between us in those months was not forgiveness. It was something earlier than forgiveness, something that has to come before it, if forgiveness is ever going to mean anything more than a performance of moving on. It was contact. The reestablishment of the most basic form of being in each other's lives. Not warmth, not trust, not the easy mother-daughter shorthand that we had lost somewhere in the 15 years she had been managing me. Just contact. Just the fact of her name on my screen and my words going back and finding her. That was where we were when she called. Tabante. It was a Sunday evening in the 10th month after the bank. I was sitting on the small back porch of my house. I had started using it more, something I had not done in years. Watching the light go flat in the way it does at the end of October, the trees across the back fence mostly bare now, the air carrying the particular cold that says winter is done negotiating and is simply going to arrive. My phone rang. Victoria. I answered. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. A pause. Not the fraught kind. More like both of us adjusting to the fact that we were actually doing this, actually speaking, after 10 months of careful distance. "Is this okay?" she asked. "Calling, I mean. I should have asked." "It's okay," I said. She let out a breath. "I've been sitting here for about 40 minutes trying to figure out what to say first." "What did you come up with?" "Nothing good?" A short, self-deprecating sound. I'm not very good at this yet. My therapist says I intellectualize everything to avoid feeling it, and I think she's probably right, but knowing that doesn't automatically fix it. I pulled my cardigan tighter against the October air. Not the faded blue one. That one had finally given out at the left elbow, and I had let it go, which had felt more significant than it should have. This one was a deep green, which Ruth had given me for my birthday in August. "What do you actually want to say?" I asked. Not the prepared version, the thing underneath it. A long silence. "I want to say that I'm sorry," she said, "but I know that's not enough, and I know I've said versions of it before, and they didn't mean what sorry is supposed to mean because I wasn't actually looking at what I'd done yet. I was apologizing for getting caught. I was apologizing for the consequences. I wasn't apologizing for the thing." She paused. "I'm trying to apologize for the thing now. The actual thing." I sat with that for a moment. "Go ahead," I said. "I am sorry for taking your money," she said. "For 4 years. For telling myself it was temporary when I knew it wasn't. For using the access you gave me because you trusted me as a way to take something you never offered." Her voice was steady, but the kind of steady that costs something to maintain. "I'm sorry for the morning at the bank. Not just what I said, but what it meant. That I had spent years building a version of myself that was ashamed of you, and that I let that happen and called it professionalism or ambition when it was just a kind of cowardice." A pause. "And I'm sorry for all the years before that. For the Christmases I didn't come home. For the calls I didn't return. For making you feel like you were too small for the life I was trying to build, when the truth was that the life I was building was too small to fit what you actually are." I did not speak immediately. Outside, a bird made a single sound in the bare tree across the fence, and then was quiet. "That last part," I said finally. "Did your therapist help you get to that?" "Yes," she said. "And no, she helped me see it, but I had to go back and actually look at things. At specific things. Things I'd been—" She stopped. "I'd been protecting myself from looking at them directly. I'd built a whole system of looking slightly to the side of everything that might hurt." "I know something about that," I said. "I know you do," she said. "I think I learned it from you, actually. Not the version you did it. Your version was to protect other people. Mine was to protect myself from having to feel bad about what I was doing to other people." She paused. "That's a significant distinction, and it took me a while to see it." I thought about that. I thought about what I had said to Patricia in those early months of the foundation, that the fault belongs to the one who takes advantage, not the one who trusts. I had said it about Gloria and her son-in-law. I had half believed it about myself. Sitting on my porch listening to my daughter, I believed it a little more fully. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "From this conversation, from whatever comes next, what are you actually hoping for?" She was quiet for long enough that I thought she might be figuring out the answer in real time. I want the chance to be different than I was, she said. Not to undo what I did. I know that's not possible, but to be different going forward. And I want you to be able to see it happen, if you're willing. Not because I need you to validate it or approve it, but because, she stopped again, because you're my mother. And I threw that away for 15 years, and I don't want to throw any more of it away. The word mother in her mouth in that moment had a different weight than it had the day she'd said it in the bank lobby. That day, it had been involuntary, something that escaped before she could manage it. This was deliberate, chosen, said by someone who had spent 10 months working up to being willing to say it and mean what it meant. I pressed my hand against my chest for a moment, just briefly. I'm not going to pretend the last 15 years didn't happen, I said. I'm not asking you to. And I'm not going to promise you things will go back to what they were before. Partly because I don't think what they were before was good for either of us. Partly because I'm 70 years old and I don't have the energy to reconstruct a relationship on a foundation that was already cracked. I know, she said. What I can tell you, I said, is that I'm not closed. I haven't been closed, even when it felt like I was. I've been protecting myself, learning to do that. It's something I never knew how to do when you were growing up, and I'm learning it late, and sometimes it probably looks like coldness from the outside. It doesn't look like coldness, she said quietly. It looks like someone who finally decided she mattered. I sat with that. Come to the foundation next Saturday, I said. Not as a visitor. Patricia has been looking for someone to help facilitate the new financial literacy workshop. It's for women who are just starting to understand what their options are after things have gone wrong. It requires someone who understands how money moves, how institutions work, how to explain complicated things simply. I paused. You would be good at it, if you decided to actually be good at it. A long silence. You want me to volunteer there, she said. I want you to work there, I said. There's a difference. Volunteering is something you do when you want to feel better about yourself. Working means you show up even when it doesn't make you feel better. It means sometimes you sit with a 68-year-old woman who was stolen from by someone she trusted, and you look her in the face knowing what you did, and you help her anyway. I heard her breathe. That's not going to be comfortable, she said. No, I said. It's not. Another pause. Okay, she said. Not the closed door okay from the bank. Not the sitting on the floor okay from the phone call about the investigation. Something else. A word said by someone standing up, both feet on the ground, looking at something hard and choosing to walk toward it anyway. Saturday, I said. 9 o'clock, 3rd floor. The elevator is working again, but Patricia still takes the stairs. I'll take the stairs, she said. She came on Saturday. I want to tell you that it was a moment of pure reconciliation, that she walked through the door and something resolved between us in the way that things resolve in stories when the arc is complete. I want to tell you the music swelled and the light was perfect, and we held each other, and everything that had broken was made whole. That's not what happened. What happened was that she arrived at 8:55, 5 minutes early, wearing jeans and a plain gray sweater with her hair down, and she stopped in the doorway of the waiting room and looked at my mother's photograph on the wall. She stood there for a long moment, then she turned and saw Patricia at the front desk, and Patricia looked at her with the particular expression of someone who knows the whole story and has decided to let the person in front of them write the next chapter themselves. I'm Victoria, she said. I know, Patricia said. Come on back. I'll show you what we're working with. They went to the back office. I was in my own office, and I did not go out to greet her. That was a choice I had thought about carefully. She didn't need me to hold her hand through the door. She needed to walk through it herself, and me hovering at the threshold would have been the old pattern dressed in new clothes. Me making myself responsible for her comfort, me managing the situation so that it would be easier for her. I let it be not easier. At 11 o'clock, Patricia knocked on my door. The first session is about to start, she said. Victoria is going to co-facilitate. I thought you might want to observe. I looked up from my desk. I'll be there in a few minutes, I said. The session was in the larger room at the end of the hall. We had set it up with a circle of chairs rather than rows, because Patricia believed, and I had come to agree, that women who had been talked at for most of their lives needed to be talked with. There were 7 women in the room that morning, different ages, different backgrounds, different specific circumstances, but the same fundamental situation, the same particular kind of damage that comes from being financially invisible for too long, from having decisions made over your head, from discovering that the people you trusted with access to your life had used that access in ways you never authorized. I sat in the back. Victoria stood at the front of the circle next to Patricia with a notepad in her hand, and I watched her look at the women in those chairs. I watched her actually look at them, not the managed professional look she had used for years, the one that was really a kind of performance of attention while the real focus was on how you were coming across, whether you were landing correctly, whether the impression you were making was the one you intended. This was different. This was the look of someone who was seeing something they recognized and were not comfortable with the recognition. She started talking. Her voice was slightly unsteady at first, not enough that most people in the room would notice, but I noticed. I had known that voice for 50 years. She introduced herself. She said she was there to help them understand their financial options. And then she said something that Patricia had not scripted and that I had not told her to say. "I want to be honest with you about something," she said. "I spent most of my career in banking. I understand how money moves and how institutions work, and how the people who know those things can use that knowledge in ways that aren't always in your interest." She paused. "I know that because I was one of those people, and I'm here now because I'm trying to be something different. You don't have to trust that yet. I'm just asking you to stay in the room." Silence. Then one of the women, a woman in her early 60s named Harriet, who had come to us 3 weeks before and who was one of the more guarded people Patricia had worked with, a woman who had been burned enough times that her default setting was a careful, watchful skepticism, looked at Victoria and said, "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in about 4 years. Victoria looked at her. "Then I'll keep going," she said. "Oh." I stayed for the whole session, 2 hours. I sat in the back and watched my daughter do the work. Not perfectly, not smoothly, stumbling occasionally over the language of financial explanation when it ran into the rougher terrain of emotional reality, losing her thread twice and finding it again, asking Patricia once in a low voice for help with a question she didn't know how to answer. Not a polished performance, not the managed, confident professional from the glass office at Westbridge Financial. Something rawer than that, and more real. Harriet asked her, near the end of the session, "What made you change?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I hurt someone," she said, "someone who didn't deserve it. And the consequences caught up with me, and I had to look at what I'd done, and what I saw." She stopped. "What I saw was that I had spent so long trying to become something impressive that I had stopped being anything decent." She paused again. "I'm not sure I'm decent yet, but I'm trying to find out what it looks like." Harriet looked at her for a long moment. "That's enough to start with," Harriet said. After the session ended and the women had gone, Patricia came to find me in the back of the room. "Well," she said. "She'll need more training," I said. "She rushed through the section on power of attorney, and she needs to slow down when she's explaining account documentation. She talks too fast when she's nervous." Patricia looked at me. "She was good, Evelyn," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm already thinking about the next session." The 3 of us went to lunch after, a diner 2 blocks from the foundation, the kind with laminated menus and coffee that came in a real pot that the server refilled without being asked. We sat in a corner booth, saw Patricia across from Victoria and me side by side, and we ordered ordinary things and talked about the session, about what had worked and what needed adjustment, about the women in the room and what they needed in the coming weeks. We talked about the foundation, about what it was becoming, about the waiting list that had grown to 22 women, about the grant application that Diane was helping us prepare for a regional foundation that could expand our capacity if it came through. We talked about Harriet and what it would take for her to move from guarded to willing. At one point, Victoria said, "She reminds me of you." "Harriet?" I said. The way she watches everything before she decides whether it's safe. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. You've always done that. I used to think it was distance. I understand now that it's just what you do when people have let you down enough times. You learn to look before you lean. I thought about that. Harriet will get there, I said. It just takes longer when the hurting went on longer. Victoria nodded. A pause settled between us, and not uncomfortable, something with more texture than that, the kind of pause that holds things. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The photograph on the wall, in the waiting room. She paused. That's Grandma, right? When she was young? Yes, I said. I almost didn't recognize her. She stopped. She looks like someone who's made a decision. I thought so too, I said. Where did you find it? In a box in my closet. I don't know how it got there. I found it the week after the bank, when I was looking for something else. Victoria was quiet. I don't have any photographs of her, she said. I realized that recently. I don't have anything of hers. She looked up. I know I don't have a right to ask. I'll have a copy made, I said. She looked at me. You don't have to? I know I don't have to, I said. That's why I'm doing it. She looked back down at her coffee. Her jaw moved slightly, the way it did when she was holding something in. I recognized that too. I had given her that, along with the stubborn pride and the difficulty with asking for help. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, I said. It might take me a while to get to the copy shop. She laughed. A real one, small and surprised, and nothing like the polished laugh from the bank lobby. Just her actual laugh, the one she'd had since she was a child, the one that came out of her before she learned to curate it. I had not heard it in years. I held it in my mind like something fragile, something I was not going to assign too much meaning to, something I was simply going to let exist for what it was. A moment. Just one moment of something that was not broken. What? My 71st birthday came on a Tuesday in February. Everything important in my life had happened on a Tuesday. I had decided, somewhere along the way, to stop being suspicious of it and start finding it simply characteristic. Ruth came over with a cake she had made herself, lemon with a cream cheese frosting that was slightly lopsided on one side because, as she told me, she had gotten distracted by a phone call from her granddaughter and lost track of the leveling. It was the best cake I had eaten in years. We sat at my kitchen table and ate 2 slices each and drank tea and talked about nothing important, and the nothing important conversation was exactly what the morning asked for. Patricia called in the afternoon to tell me that the grant application had been approved. Partial funding? Not the full amount we had asked for, but real money and a 2-year commitment and the kind of institutional credibility that would make the next application stronger. I sat with the phone in my hand after she hung up and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing going right that you had worked for, that you had not simply hoped for, but actually built toward. Diane sent flowers, yellow ones, which she knew I preferred to red. And in the early evening, when the light through my kitchen window was going golden, the way it did in February, when the sun got low, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it. Victoria was standing on my porch. She was wearing the gray sweater again, and her hair was in a loose braid, and she was holding something in both hands. A flat, square package wrapped in brown paper, tied with a length of plain twine. We looked at each other. "Happy birthday," she said. "Come in," I said. She sat at my kitchen table in the chair she had always used when she was small, the one nearest the window, and she set the package on the table between us. She didn't push it toward me, she just set it there. I sat across from her. "I've been working on this for a while," she said. "Patricia helped with some of it, and I found some things I didn't know I still had." She paused. "It's not an apology. I know I said what I needed to say. This is just something I wanted to give you." I pulled the package toward me. The twine came loose easily. The brown paper unfolded. It was a photograph album. Not expensive, not elaborate. The kind you can buy at a drugstore with a dark green cover and plain pages. But when I opened it, what I found was not plain. She had filled it with photographs. Not the digital kind, printed on thin paper that fades. She had taken the time to have them properly printed, the kind that have weight. And the photographs were not what I expected. They were not the formal photographs I had seen before, the milestones and posed portraits and the documentation of a successful life. They were small things. A photograph of my kitchen table, empty, early morning light coming through the window. Taken when I wasn't there, in some previous year. In some moment, I hadn't known she was paying attention. A photograph of my mother's purse, lying on the arm of my living room chair. A photograph of the peace lily on Diane's windowsill. A photograph of the stairwell in the foundation building, the one with the corkboard and the flyers. A photograph of Harriet, taken at the end of that first session, her head slightly bowed, her hands folded, something in her posture that was different from the guarded woman who had walked in 2 hours earlier. A photograph of Ruth's lopsided cake, which meant Victoria had been here earlier today, which meant she and Ruth had been in this kitchen together while I was somewhere else, which meant things had been arranged without my knowing. A photograph of me. I almost didn't recognize myself at first, because it was not a posed photograph. I was sitting on my back porch in the October light, the deep green cardigan, my head turned slightly to the side the way my mother's head was turned in the photograph on the foundation wall, looking at something outside the frame. I didn't know she had taken it. I didn't know she had been there. "When did you—" I started. "After we got off the phone that night," she said quietly. "I drove over. I was going to knock, but you were on the porch and you looked so— you just looked like yourself. And I hadn't seen you look like yourself in so long. I didn't want to interrupt it." She paused. "I should have told you I was there." "Yes," I said. "You should have." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." I turned another page. The last photograph in the album was of my mother's photograph, the one on the foundation wall, taken straight on, nothing else in the frame. Just the young woman looking at something just outside the image, with that quality of decision on her face. Underneath it, in Victoria's handwriting on a small piece of cardstock, were the words, "I see her now. I see both of you." I closed the album. I sat with it in my hands and I did not try to manage what I was feeling. I had spent 70 years managing what I was feeling, deciding what was appropriate to let through and what needed to stay behind the door I was always holding shut. I was done with that particular practice. Not all feelings need to be expressed, but they all need to be felt. And feeling this one fully, in all its complexity, the grief and the relief and the something that was almost but not quite the beginning of trust, was what the moment asked for. I pressed both hands flat against the cover of the album. "This is good work," I said finally. Victoria let out a breath. "I'm trying," she said. "I know," I said. "I can see it." A pause. "I'm not going to tell you things are fixed," I said, "because they're not. And I'm not going to tell you that I've stopped being angry, because I haven't entirely, and I'm not going to pretend the anger is less than it is just because I'm also glad you're here." I looked at her across the table. "What I'm going to tell you is that I'm glad you're here. Both things are true at the same time. I've learned that two things can be true at the same time." She nodded. "I've been learning that too," she said. "Good," I said. "Keep learning it." Ruth's cake was still on the counter, and I cut 2 slices and we sat in my kitchen in the February evening and ate cake and talked about small things and some things that weren't small at all, and outside the window the city went about its business in the way cities do, indifferent and enormous, full of people in the middle of their own particular reckonings. We were just 2 of them, a mother and a daughter sitting at a kitchen table, both imperfect, both trying, both carrying the weight of what had happened and choosing, for now, not to let it be the only thing in the room. That is not a triumphant ending. I know that. But I have lived long enough to be suspicious of triumphant endings, because life doesn't actually move that way. It moves incrementally, messily, with setbacks you didn't prepare for and small victories that don't announce themselves, and moments of ordinary grace that are easy to miss if you're watching for the dramatic ones. The dramatic ones, in my experience, are overrated. What matters is the slice of cake at the kitchen table. What matters is the photograph on the wall and the woman in it looking at something you can't see. What matters is the 67-year-old woman who came back to the appointment after sitting in the parking lot for 40 minutes. What matters is the first real laugh you hear from someone after years of only hearing the performed version. What matters is that you are still here, still sitting at your own table, still choosing every morning you wake up to take up the space that was always yours to take. I want to speak to you directly now. You who have been with me through this whole story. You who have listened. I don't know what you're carrying today. I don't know whether you're someone's mother or someone's child or both at once. I don't know whether you recognized yourself in Evelyn or in Victoria or in neither of them or in the spaces between them. The silences, the managed distances, the years of making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. But I think if you've stayed with this story to the end, something in it found something in you. And so I want to say what I believe, plainly, the way I wish someone had said it to me earlier. You are allowed to matter, not conditionally, not after you have proven your worth to the satisfaction of the people who benefit from your smallness. You are allowed to matter right now, as you are, with everything you are carrying. The years you gave to others do not make you less deserving of what you need. They are not a debt you took on. They are not something to be used against you. The love you offered that wasn't honored was real love. It does not become less real because someone failed to treat it that way. And to those of you who are in the middle of being the daughter Victoria was, who are reading this and feeling the discomfort of recognition, the specific discomfort of seeing yourself in a character who did something you're not proud of, I want to say something to you too. It is not too late to look. It is not too late to stop looking slightly to the side of the thing you've been protecting yourself from seeing. Looking at what you've done, really looking at it without the armor of justification, is not a punishment. It is the only door that leads somewhere better than where you are. The people who love you are not bottomless. They are not invincible. They have been hurt in specific ways on specific days, and the fact that they are still in your life does not mean the hurting didn't happen. Honor that, while you still have the chance to. Because here is the thing that took me 70 years to understand, and I am telling you now in case you need to hear it sooner, the money was never the point. The $3.5 million in the account my father built was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance was the photograph of a woman looking at something just outside the frame. It was the purse worn smooth at the handle from being carried through a life. It was the lesson my father tried to teach me, which I finally understood the morning I stood at a bank counter and refused to be moved to the side anymore. That the loudest thing about a person doesn't have to be what they have. The loudest thing about a person can be what they refuse to give away. Your dignity is yours. Your worth is yours. No one has the right to diminish it, no matter how much you love them, no matter how long you've been telling yourself that love requires you to be less. Set the boundary. Move the money. Close the account if you have to. Not out of cruelty. Out of the simple, radical, deeply human act of deciding that you matter enough to protect. And then build something. Build something that stays after you're gone, even if it's small. A foundation, a garden, a friendship that shows up in a parking lot and doesn't ask you to be ready before you're ready. Build something that carries the shape of what you believed in, so that when someone walks into the room after you, they can feel it in the chairs and the light and the woman on the wall looking at something you couldn't see but knew was there. That is the inheritance worth leaving. That is the victory worth having. Not the millions, not the public moment when the account balance rearranged everyone's understanding, not the look on anyone's face when the number was said out loud in a quiet lobby. The victory is that you chose yourself. And in choosing yourself, you built something large enough to choose other people too. Go home tonight and look at the people you love. Look at them the way they deserve to be looked at. And if someone in your life has been looking slightly past you for years, if you have been the person in the faded cardigan at the counter, the person who has been making themselves smaller and smaller and calling it love, I hope this story found you at the right time. I hope it found you before you ran out of Tuesdays. Because there is still time to stand at the counter and say the number that changes everything. And the most important number is not in any bank account. It is one. One person deciding she is done being invisible. Everything else follows from there. The money was never the point. The $3.5 million in the account my father built was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance was the photograph of a woman looking at something just outside the frame. It was the purse worn smooth at the handle from being carried through a life. It was the lesson my father tried to teach me, which I finally understood the morning I stood at a bank counter and refused to be moved to the side anymore. That the loudest thing about a person doesn't have to be what they have. The loudest thing about a person can be what they refuse to give away. Your dignity is yours. Your worth is yours. No one has the right to diminish it, no matter how much you love them, no matter how long you've been telling yourself that love requires you to be less. Set the boundary. Move the money. Close the account if you have to. Not out of cruelty, out of the simple, radical, deeply human act of deciding that you matter enough to protect. And then build something. Build something that stays after you're gone, even if it's small. A foundation, a garden, a friendship that shows up in a parking lot and doesn't ask you to be ready before you're ready. Build something that carries the shape of what you believed in, so that when someone walks into the room after you, they can feel it in the chairs and the light and the woman on the wall looking at something you couldn't see but knew was there. That is the inheritance worth leaving. That is the victory worth having, not the millions, not the public moment when the account balance rearranged everyone's understanding, not the look on anyone's face when the number was said out loud in a quiet lobby. The victory is that you chose yourself. And in choosing yourself, you built something large enough to choose other people too. Go home tonight and look at the people you love. Look at them the way they deserve to be looked at. And if someone in your life has been looking slightly past you for years, if you have been the person in the faded cardigan at the counter, the person who has been making themselves smaller and smaller and calling it love, I hope this story found you at the right time. I hope it found you before you ran out of Tuesdays, because there is still time to stand at the counter and say the number that changes everything. And the most important number is not in any bank account. It is one. One person deciding she is done being invisible. Everything else follows from there.